One thing that you'll find yourself doing often inside of Photoshop is making selections. And selections are great because you will use them to move things around, to recolor things, or add special filters, and a whole array of other things that you can do inside of Photoshop whenever you make a selection. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what that means. So if we go to the top, the first tool that we have is the rectangle marquee tool, and the shortcut key is M. And that's basically going to allow us to select a rectangle. Now, if we hold down the Shift key, it will constrain it so that all the sides are even, essentially making a square. So if you look at our little tooltip there, it says 237 pixels by 237 pixels. And as I grow this out, it stays uniform. If I let go of Shift, we can go back to any size rectangle that we would like. When I let go, we get these marching ants, and that is showing me the selection that I've made. Now, you can do all kinds of things. So just for instance, if I go to the top and I click the Move tool here, I can basically take this selection and now move it anywhere in the document that I would like to. However, it does show the canvas behind it, which is just basically a white background. Now, at the top in the menu bar, there is the Select tab, and you'll want to learn some of these selection options. And in this video, I can't show you every single way to select in Photoshop because there's a lot of them, but later on we'll go in more detail with all these different tools and options that you have for selecting. But you really want to learn these first four. They're pretty important, and you can see that we have Control A to select all, or Command A on macOS, and when I click that, it selects the whole document. So you can see that there's marching ants now around the whole document. There's also deselect with Control D or Command D, and that'll deselect everything in the document. We can reselect our last selection. So now we've reselected whatever was selected last, and that's with Shift Control D or Shift Command D. And we can select the inverse, Shift Control I or Shift Command I. So let's go ahead and reselect our rectangle here, and if you didn't see that, sometimes to deselect, what I'll do is I'll just go off of the canvas and just click one time. It'll also deselect, or you can use the shortcut Control or Command D to deselect. But we'll go ahead and make our rectangle, and we'll do inverse now. And what will happen is, instead of selecting the rectangle, it selects everything but the rectangle. So if I grab my Move tool, instead of moving that rectangle, it's actually going to move the rest of the document and leave that rectangle there. So we're just going to undo that and deselect. Now let's take a look at some other tools that we have here. We have an elliptical marquee tool. This will allow us to make ellipses. Or if we hold Shift, you can make perfect circles. We also have a single row and a single column marquee tool. This is great for slicing up your document and for doing other kinds of effects, but basically it will allow us to make a single pixel selection across the length or the height of the document. And I'm just undoing those just to get back to no selection real fast. Then we have the lasso tool. This is with the shortcut key L. And there's three different ones in here: lasso tool, polygonal lasso, and magnetic lasso. So the lasso tool will let us freehand a selection. So I can just draw the selection I want, and then when I let go, it'll give us those marching ants. Now, as you can see, I did not close that selection, and so it took the last point and the first point and figured out the distance between those and filled that in. So you can't have an open selection. It has to be closed, and if you let go at any point, it'll make that closure for you. So we'll deselect that. That's a nice way to freehand some selections. There's a polygonal lasso tool, so instead of just being, freehand, you can actually do hard lines, which is great for making any kind of hard points. And here I have to either close it by going to the first point, and you'll see my little logo changes to a little circle showing a closure, or I can just hit enter and it'll close it automatically for me. And then we have the magnetic lasso tool, and what this will do is it'll allow us to make a selection, but it's going to go ahead and make that selection closest to where it sees differences in pixels. So for instance, we have this white area and this blue area, and if I go ahead and use this tool, it's actually going to try to grab where those 2 points meet between the blue and white, because it's seeing a major difference in the pixels between the white and blue. Now, it's not perfect, and you'll have to go in and adjust this later on. There's also some options at the top in the options bar that you can make, but basically this is a great quick way to make a nice selection without being perfect with the lasso tool. The magnetic lasso tool will go ahead and try to find those differences and make that selection for you. So that's a great tool to use there. Something else that you can do is you can use the quick selection tool and the magic wand tool with the shortcut key W. And these tools are different based on their options at the top. So the quick selection tool uses a brush, and there's not a whole lot of options other than adding and subtracting from your selection. And the magic wand tool does it based on a sample and the tolerance of where you're selecting. So if I go ahead and I take the quick selection tool and I click in the yellow area, because the brush is set to 30 and it's all mostly yellow, it'll go ahead and pick that up for me, and it selected all the yellow piece for me. Now, if I wanted to add to it, I can keep selecting, and now we're picking everything in the yellow and the blue area. And this is really great. And we can also do something similar with the magic wand tool, only the magic wand tool is going to be based on a tolerance. So let me go ahead and deselect here. And now when I click the yellow, you can see that it hasn't made a perfect selection because there's actually differences in the tolerance of colors here. There's lighter yellows and darker yellows, and so it hasn't selected everything. So I'll need to go in and keep clicking. Actually, I'll need to hold down Shift to add to my selection and keep clicking to pick up the rest of those yellow pieces. And you want to experiment with both tools because they're used for different things. This magic wand tool is actually really great whenever you're doing things like hair and fine details. Quick selection tool is great when you just are trying to pick out nice, big, bold things like this pencil here. I can go in and select that very quickly. Now, I did this real fast. I'll back up for a minute. If I hold Shift, it'll allow us to add to that selection. So I can actually select that pencil and this green part over here and maybe this blue part. And to subtract, I can hold the Alt or the Option key for macOS, and it'll actually deselect. So if I picked up something I don't want, like say this white area here, I can kind of deselect that out. And you can always fine-tune these and play around with them a little longer to make it perfect, but I'm just trying to quickly show you how a lot of these selection tools work. So we'll deselect that. A couple other quick things real fast, and we'll get into this a little more later in some of the more intermediate and advanced lessons, but there is a mask mode that you can click on down here, and what this does is we can take a paintbrush, and we'll just make the paintbrush a little bigger. I'll just show you this real fast. And we can paint, and basically it's going to cut out anywhere that we've painted. So if I make this selection, and you imagine I've cut that out with scissors, when I exit the quick mask mode, we can see that selection there. However, if I grab the move tool, you'll see that it's actually cut it out instead of grabbing that area. So one thing, let me undo that. One thing that you might want to do is use that quick mask and use brushes to paint where you want to select, and then again go to select inverse, and then now we can pick up just that selection. There's also some other great tools inside of the select toolbar here. If we go here, we can select by layers, color range, focus area, subject. Again, we can select and mask. We can change our selections. We can grow them or make them similar, transform them, and we can also load and save selections if you're using certain selections often. So just real quick, I'll show you one of these. The color range will allow us to sample a color and then pick up a selection based on that color. So if I select, say, this yellow here, you can see it's picking up the yellow, and because the yellow of this paintbrush is similar, it's also picking up a little bit of it also. Again, I can hold Shift and pick up that yellow, and now it's grabbing some more of this other yellow over here, and we can grab those holding Shift, and now we've selected all the yellows in the scene. Again, I can hold Alt or Option to deselect, and you can make some changes here, which we'll talk about in some future lessons about the fuzziness and the colors that you want to sample and so forth. But if I hit OK, it's selected those based on its color, and that's nice and easily for us. So you'll want to mess around with these different selection methods. We'll talk more about them later on, but get used to them because it'll allow us to do a lot of things inside of Photoshop, and it's something that you'll use pretty commonly.